It is 2016, and I am terrified of my alarm clock. I'm terrified of my alarm clock because I can't get out of bed. I can't get out of bed because the weight in my chest pinning me down is a reminder of how much I want to die. I had always struggled with anxiety and depression, but I never knew how to talk about it out loud. There was always a bubble of silence that surrounded me. I never knew how to talk about mental illness to my friends or family. I was so scared that I wouldn't make them proud of me. And so I suffered silently. Instead of getting the proper medical treatment that I needed and that I deserved, I Googled for natural depression remedies, went to my local GNC, and got some vitamins. Instead of telling my friends and my family what I was really going through, how miserable I felt, I stayed in bed and I avoided all conversations, and I put down all of those feelings and thoughts into my poetry and into my journal. My freshman year of college, I lost 2 close friends to suicide. And it was terrible. And yet, this stigma surrounding mental health persisted. No one in my community talked about mental health. Nobody showed me that it was okay to say, I'm not okay today. And so again, I stayed in my bed. I avoided conversations. I didn't tell anyone what I was going through. And I put all of those thoughts and feelings into my poetry, into my journal. I let the bubble of silence stay surrounding me. It wasn't until one day when my friend dragged me out of bed, quite literally, to an open mic that silence began to be lifted. I didn't really care about anything at this point. I didn't care about how I looked. I was there in a pair of sweatpants and a pajama top. And this was at the point in my life where it took so much energy to just get out of bed and to shower and to call someone to say hello. But something that day really provoked me to get on that stage and to share my story. The lights were pounding down on me, and the sound of my heartbeat was the loudest that I had ever heard it before. But I still told my story, and I read my poem that day, finally telling my mental health journey, finally telling the people around me how much I was suffering, what it felt like to lose 2 friends to suicide in 1 year. What followed was amazing. The strangers in the room came up to me and they began to share their own stories. They began to ask me questions about what it was like to have a panic attack, what it was like to not be able to get out of bed. And their comments made me feel like my story was real, like it mattered. This was the first time that I talked about mental health to anybody, let alone to strangers in the community. A few months later, it was Thanksgiving time, and my family had a tradition of flying to Florida and convening for a big party at a Russian restaurant nightclub type of setting. I was all dressed up in a fancy dress with my whole extended family and friends. Everybody was drinking and we were dancing, and there was loud music with Russian obscenities blaring in the background. And I just couldn't take it anymore. And I ran out of the Russian nightclub out into the parking lot. My mom followed me there. She asked me, "What's wrong?" Now, usually when someone would ask me what's wrong, I would just say nothing, I'm fine. And I would remain within that silence, the stigma really shutting me out from the rest of the world. But I remember the feeling of sharing my poems to the room full of strangers, how they received my story with empathy and with kindness. And that gave me courage in that moment. I finally told my mom everything that I was feeling and everything that I was going through. And she looked at me with love in her eyes. She wrapped her arms around me. And all she said was, "Tomorrow we'll find you a doctor." And we did. And I finally started taking proper medicine, not just vitamins from GNC. And I went to therapy, and I talked about my mental illness, and I talked about what it was that I was going through. And I finally knew that I wasn't alone. And I started to feel better. This experience of being able to talk openly and honestly with the people around me, my family, my friends, strangers in a room, really inspired me to keep up encouraging people to speak up about mental health. I began to talk openly about my experiences to anyone who could listen. I encouraged my friends to do the same. And I even started my own nonprofit, ARMS, Art to Reduce Mental Health Stigma, to empower others to share their own stories and feel safe doing so. It's 2019 now. Sometimes I still cry getting out of bed. But I know that I can talk about my experiences with the people around me. So I got rid of my alarm clock. I wake up every day and I live.